Friday Night Funkin' has been out for almost 2 years now, and in that time, the community has made a ton of ships. Some of those ships have been quite adorable, while others have been very cringe, as some would say. And in this video, I want to cover the top 25 most popular ships, and then I want to cover the top 3 most controversial ships to be introduced in Friday Night Funkin'. Let's start this video off with talking about Tabi, because he's a OG character in Friday Night Funkin', and he actually has some interesting ships. The first one I think we should cover is Tabi and Ayana. Now this ship was interesting for a couple of reasons. In case you don't know, Ayana is actually boyfriend's ex, while Tabi is obviously girlfriend's ex. Now one of the main reasons that people ship these two is because they love the idea of girlfriend and boyfriend's exes actually meeting and falling in love. I think people really like the drama that comes with that little backstory. And also, people were very sympathetic to Tabi's character, especially the fact that girlfriend really screwed him over. And I honestly feel like people love to see Tabi actually find happiness and love again, even though it wasn't canon. Now we all know that the Friday Night Funkin' community has a lot of weirdos and a lot of bad actors, but one thing that you cannot deny is when people in this community fall in love with a character, they really fall in love with them and love to see them actually have a good happy ending. Now continuing on with Tabi's ships, I want to talk about Tabi and Agoti. This was a ship from way back in the day. In case you don't know, Tabi and Agoti were said to be basically best friends, so there was a lot of artwork made of them just being buddies, but the community took that and of course they had to take that to the next level and made it to where Tabi and Agoti were actually in love. Now in defense of the community though, the two do have a lot in common, Tabi being a music producer and a music artist himself, while Agoti of course is a world star. If you remember in his lore, he was such a good artist that he made Daddy Dearest and Mommy Maris jealous of his talents, which is why he got sent to the void in the first place. And funny enough, when you think about it, Tabi was also punished by Daddy Dearest as well. The reason that Tabi is an invisible man and he has that goat head stuck over his actual head is because Daddy Dearest put a curse on him. So another reason that these two are usually shipped is because they both were punished by Daddy Dearest and kind of share that pain. Now since we're on the topic of Agoti, let's talk about a popular Agoti ship, which was actually Agoti and NikuSa. Now if I'm being honest, I'm surprised that NikuSa didn't get shipped with more people because people were really simping for her.
Mommy? Sorry. Mommy? Sorry. Mommy? Sorry.
Now the irony with the ship between Agoti and NikuSa is that NikuSa doesn't actually have feelings for anybody. If you look into her lore, she's actually called the Void Queen, and not just because she's a cosmic horror, but because she literally feels nothing inside, as if she has a void inside of her. So while Agoti may consider NikuSa to be a friend, from her point of view, she's just using him because she doesn't want to be alone and she wants to feel something. So when you know the actual backstory of this ship, it's actually quite sad and not cute at all. Next on my list, I want to talk about a couple of more OG ships, and we're going to start off with the Carol and Whitty ship. Now back in the day, Whitty was definitely the most popular Friday Night Funkin' mod character, and he still may be pound for pound the most popular character ever brought into Friday Night Funkin', and I mean that with no exaggeration. People went crazy over Whitty. And of course, Carol was popular in her own right, been one of the first mod characters made by BB Panzu. And of course, over time, people started shipping these two characters, even though their personalities were pretty much opposite. Now, I say this because if you notice, Carol is very laid back, she's very friendly, very calm and collected, while Whitty is more isolated, he doesn't really like people, and he has a horrible temper. I mean, he is literally a living bomb, which means that when he gets mad, he can explode. And I think the reason that people really like to ship these two is because they like to think that Carol is the person that actually completes Whitty and keeps him from losing his cool. Her calming presence is able to balance out his chaotic one, basically humanizing him in a way. Another popular character that was commonly shipped with Whitty was Hex. And I know a lot of you may not remember Hex because he's from when Friday Night Funkin' first came out. But this ship actually made a lot of sense. Both Whitty and Hex were considered to be non-humans, and they were both created in a factory. On top of that, they were both left alone after some point in time. After Whitty was created in that factory, he was basically abandoned, just left there basically to raise himself. And while Hex did have an old man as his companion for a while, eventually the old man passes away and leaves him alone as well. One good thing about this pair though is that while Whitty is very antisocial, Hex is actually very social. He's definitely an extrovert while Whitty is an introvert. So the two of them kind of balance each other out and help fill the void for each other, right? Especially considering that Hex can actually go out and meet people and help Whitty get out there as well. Another popular ship for Whitty was also Whitty and Ruv, and this one, kind of like Hex, made a lot of sense as well. Just like Whitty, Ruv was also abandoned as a child and basically had to raise himself, and this is why he ends up becoming a criminal. If you don't know, he had a huge bounty on his head at one point. And before he meets Sarvente, Ruv is pretty much always on his own. So in a way, Ruv and Whitty really have the same type of personality, and they both have that same introverted, kind of isolated lifestyle, so these two being together isn't really that much of a stretch. To go back to Carol real quick, I also want to talk about the Carol and Sunday ship, because this is another ship that was very popular back when Friday Night Funkin' was still fairly new. And in reality, the Sunday and Carol ship wasn't that crazy, because when you look at Sunday's lore, she's actually exes with Carol. And not only that, the two are best friends and they actually live together. So even though they're kind of opposite personalities, with Carol being super laid back and Sunday kind of been a little more intense, she's literally the lead singer in a rock band. And she dreams of assassinating certain billionaires, we won't say who. But their ship makes sense in a way. Next up, I want to talk about the ships that come along with Sarvente, because she's definitely a character that people had a little crush on for a while. The first one that I want to talk about is probably going to be the most fun one, and that's going to be the Taki and Sarvente ship. When Taki first came out, people were absolutely in love with this character because of the crazy chainsaw and the nurse costume, and if we're being honest, also because she was named after those chips. Now, funny enough, before people started shipping these two characters, they actually thought that they were sisters. And once it came out that Sarvente is technically a demon while Taki is an alien, people realized that obviously they couldn't be related, so then the ships started coming in. But in reality, if you know the backstory of these two characters, you know that they would never work out. Sarvente is pretending to be a nun, but she's actually trying to get people into heaven, while Taki is pretending to be a nun simply because she needed a job and a place to live, and Caesar just gave her the church. But in reality, Taki could care less about what happens to people's souls after they die, because as I said, she's not actually a nun. But since we're on the topic of Sarvente, let's talk about the Sarvente and girlfriend ship. And this one, in my opinion, is one of the more interesting ones, because girlfriend was the only demon that Sarvente didn't actually hate. When people learned this, they just assumed that Sarvente obviously must have had a crush on girlfriend. The other option, of course, being that girlfriend may just have a good heart as compared to the other demons that are in the Friday Night Funkin' universe. The last ship I want to talk about for Sarvente is going to be the Sarvente and Ruv ship. Now, a lot of you may not remember, but originally, Sarvente and Ruv were not actually together. They were considered to be best friends that just happened to live with each other in the church. Now, as their story got more fleshed out, we were introduced to their children, Selever and Razazi, but there was a little trick that went with this. Basically, since in the canon universe they hadn't actually had children, the children that we were introduced to were from a different timeline. So basically, Razazi and Selever were trapped in this white void, waiting and hoping that their parents in the canon world would actually get together, have children so that they could be free. And I think the reason that so many people really gravitated towards this ship is because they sympathized with Selever and Razazi, and the fact that they were basically being imprisoned for something that they had no control over and they didn't do anything wrong. And if we're being honest, of course, Selever was definitely one of, and still is probably one of the more popular characters to be brought into the Friday Night Funkin' community. So it would make sense that people would definitely root for his parents. Now, another interesting character that Ruv was actually shipped with is going to be Taki. And I thought this one was interesting because people basically just felt, since Taki actually looks a lot like Sarvente, that she and Ruv would be a good match. But I think these two would actually be very toxic together because they're both very individualist. They just follow their own heart and they don't really pay attention to rules or laws. And when you look into their backstory, it literally says that Taki has no problem using her chainsaw to just go right through somebody's torso. And we know that Ruv has killed many people, especially rich people. And on a smaller note, he even throws rocks at children. Putting these two together would be a terrible combination. The next character that I want to talk about is one of the most shipped characters in Friday Night Funkin', and that's going to be Senpai, which I'm sure is of no surprise to anybody. People were obsessed with Senpai because admittedly he is a bit of a pretty boy. The first ship that I want to talk about is actually one of the first ships that popped up for Senpai, and that was Senpai and Girlfriend. The reason behind this ship, of course, is because in week 6 he's literally flirting with Girlfriend in front of Boyfriend, right? The reason that y'all are singing or rap battling against each other is to win Girlfriend's heart. Now, in Senpai's defense, they did literally go into a dating simulator, so it makes sense that he would think that she's there to date him, but that's beside the point. The next ship that I want to talk about is Senpai and Miku, and I find this one interesting because the only reason people put these two together is because Miku is considered to be boyfriend's sister in this universe, and people just like the drama of Senpai not being able to get girlfriend, so he goes after boyfriend's sister just to be a douchebag. But the funny part about this ship is that they actually fit pretty well together, considering that they're both considered to be computer programs, and they're obviously both musically inclined. And this leads us into the next ship for Senpai, which is actually Senpai and Monica. And this one was a little bit weird initially because a lot of people were saying that Senpai and Monica were actually brother and sister. And then once that got rebuked, they actually started shipping the two of them. Now, just like with Miku, this isn't necessarily out of left field because they both are technically like computer programs. They're inside video games. So it kind of makes sense that these two would end up together in some way. And when you take into account that they're both not really what they seem to be on the surface, it also makes sense that they'll be together as well. The next ship on this list is going to be the weirdest ship, I think, and that's going to be Senpai and Monster. Now, initially, I could not understand why people would ship Senpai with this demonic lemon demon. But as I really started to think about it, it makes sense in a way. On the outside, Senpai comes off as a very proper, very attractive, and just a nice person. But as we see when he actually loses the rap battle in week 6, he actually reveals his true self. He's actually very abrasive, he's very, very rude, and he's kind of a jerk just in general. And I think the ship between Monster and Senpai kind of reflects his true self. Senpai is shipped with a monster because deep down that's what he actually is, and I know my metaphor is a little bit cheesy, but it's kind of true when you think about his character. Since we're talking about Monster, let's go ahead and talk about another monster ship, which is Monster and Lila. Now, some of you may not know Lila, but she is actually the mother of Skid. And a lot of people started to believe that she was actually the mother of Pump as well. And then, of course, the next logical step would be that if she has a pumpkin kid, maybe the father is Lemon Demon. Now, in defense of some of the people in the community, Friday Night Funkin' was their first introduction to the spooky kids. So realistically, they might not have realized that the kids are just wearing costumes and are not actually a skeleton in a pumpkin. Because realistically, if you believe that they actually are a undead skeleton and a pumpkin, it stands to reason that why couldn't Monster actually be their father? All in all, I think this is one of the more unrealistic ships that have come out of Friday Night Funkin', but I will admit that it is funny. Fun fact that some of you may not remember, but there was a mod called the Dust Monolith mod that came out a few months back. And in this mod, when Lila literally gets transformed into a giant spider, Monster also transforms into a more monstrous form of himself, but he takes on the role as stepfather to Skid and Pump, who also survived this Dust Monolith. So even though the ship was kind of ridiculous, it does find its way in different Friday Night Funkin' mods from time to time. The next ship that I want to talk about is actually Monica and Miku, and this is a ship that wasn't super popular, but it did make its way into Friday Night Funkin' for a little while. This ship actually wasn't too crazy because when you think about it, both Monica and Miku are both computer programs in a sense, so the idea of these two being together is kind of in the same boat as Senpai and Monica being together, or even Senpai and Miku. The next ship that I want to talk about was actually canon for a while, and that's Bob and Ophibop. And I think the reason that this ship actually died out is because a lot of people were making animations of Ron actually unaliving Ophibop. And if that's not bad enough, they would then send those animations to Ophibop's creator. And eventually the creator just had enough of it and just cut the ship off, simply so that they wouldn't get harassed anymore. I think it's another one of those cases of, the Friday Night Funkin' community just can't stand to have nice things sometimes, so they go out of their way to destroy them. The next ship is actually one of my favorite ships, and that's Garcello and Annie. And for people that don't know, these are actually made by creators who are basically working together. That's Atsover and Rage Minor. And when you look into the lore of Garcello and Annie, the two are basically best friends. So it isn't really that crazy that these two might actually fall in love or be in a relationship. But also when you look at their personalities, they're both very laid back, very chill, and they seem to have a lot of the same interests. So people shipping these two definitely didn't surprise me. Now, one reason that people have a lot of issues with this ship though is because people really think that Garcello is like 35, 45 years old. They think he's literally an old man. But in reality, Garcello is about 26 years old and Annie is about 21. So while yes, he is a little bit older than her, that age gap isn't really that crazy, and they're both well into their adult years. The next ship I want to talk about actually transcend just Friday Night Funkin', and that's going to be Tricky and Hank. This ship has been argued over the internet for a long time, and I think originally this started out as a troll, and then people started actually taking it seriously and making some weird artwork with Tricky and Hank, and now it's just out of control. But the irony here is that Tricky and Hank are literally worse enemies. Whenever these two are together in Madness Combat, there's going to be a lot of death that follows, and one of them usually ends up killing the other. Now, I will admit that I don't know as much about the Madness Combat series as I know about Friday Night Funkin' and that lore, so if there's anybody who knows how this ship really started or if I'm missing anything, let me know, because this one literally boggles my mind. I cannot understand it. This next ship on our list, I debated putting it with the controversial ships, but I'm going to keep it over here with the rest of them. And this ship is going to be Retrospector and Sakurama, and this one on the surface doesn't seem that weird. Retrospector is literally like a demonic dragon, while Sakurama is this demonic moth monster. So these two being shipped together didn't seem that odd to me. But the internet really had an issue with this one, and I think Sakurama's character in general, especially the younger people in the Friday Night Funkin' community who arguably probably shouldn't even be playing the game in the first place. But people just felt that Sakurama was over-sexualized and just doing a little too much, and the ship just made people even more uncomfortable. The irony here though is that in her lore, she's like the demon of lust or something. So I just found it super ironic that people thought the character that was supposed to represent the sin of lust was over-sexualized. And I'm wondering, like, what did you expect? Next up, I want to talk about all the popular Pico ships that have been introduced to Friday Night Funkin' as of late. And the first one I want to start off with is Pico and Nene. And you can argue that this one transcends Friday Night Funkin', kind of like the Tricky and Hank ship. Now, part of me understands why people would ship these two. I mean, both Pico and Nene are both kind of crazy, and they both share that experience of being a part of that school bloody event, we'll call it. But if my memory serves me correct, I'm pretty sure Pico ends up unaliving Nene on accident. So it's kind of weird that people end up shipping these two together knowing the history of them. And speaking of weird histories, that goes further with the people who are shipping Pico and Cassandra. Now, Pico School was a long time ago, but if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure Cassandra is the one that makes Pico basically go insane, and she's also the reason that the school is bloody in the first place. So the Pico Cassandra ship is definitely in the top 3 worst ships on this list in my opinion. Obviously, Hank and Tricky are probably above that, but this one is pretty close to the top. The next ship that we're going to talk about is probably one of the more controversial ships that popped up in Friday Night Funkin', and that's Pico and Boyfriend. Now, initially this started out as just a joke, but eventually ended up becoming canon. And even with that, a lot of people still didn't accept this ship. They didn't like it because they just simply didn't like the idea of Boyfriend dating another guy, if we're being honest. But no, honestly, the way that the mods ended up playing out and the fact that Pico came to kind of rescue Boyfriend in the end, it all just flowed together so well that it was very hard to hate their little relationship, even though they weren't technically together, right? They were just exes. And when you add on top of that the fact that the community actually made some pretty awesome artwork of the two, it was really hard not to get behind this ship in my opinion. But I feel like I have to say that this ship definitely showed us that there was a lot of homophobia in the Friday Night Funkin' community, and it was actually really sad to see because I feel like we lost a lot of good creators simply because they didn't really conform to that heterosexual norm, and in turn faced a lot of bullying and harassment in the community in general. But at the same time, there were people who were actually doing heinous things in the community who got to stick around much longer than they should have. And I think that's a good transition to go into our controversial ships. And the first on this list is of course going to be the Bob and Bosip ship. Now, a lot of people were upset about this ship because they didn't want Bob to be gay, but later on it took on a much bigger issue in the form of the actual creator and more. It turned out that he was basically making a lot of terrible artwork that was sexually explicit. And on top of that, it seemed like he was also in contact with people that were far too young to be in contact with him. And obviously I'm trying to choose my words wisely, but I'm sure you understand exactly what I'm saying. Now, with that being said, not only was this ship controversial, but the whole mod was controversial within itself now. And this begs an interesting question. Put down in the comments, do you think that the mod should be punished because of the mistakes of the creator, or should people still be allowed to play and enjoy the Bob and Bosip mod even though the creator did some terrible things? The next controversial ship we're going to talk about is actually going to be Sky and Selever, and this one has a couple of layers to it. Now, up to this point, Sky had already been in a ton of controversies, most revolving around the idea of her age and a lot of inappropriate artwork that had been getting spread around the internet and in various discords. But what a lot of people don't know is that the drama with Selever is that he's only 17, and the mod creator specifically said that they did not want him to be shipped with anybody because he is just a kid. And ultimately the internet did what the internet does, and it completely ignored that and started shipping these two very controversial characters together. And I feel like the internet was kind of split on this one because while yes, they are still children, I think people felt like they were close enough to being adults where it was okay to ship them. I still lean more towards the idea that you should respect the mod creator's wishes, but with that being said, once you put your art into the world, you can't really control what people do with it, unfortunately. But this point leads us right into the final controversial ship on this list, and that is Skid and Pump. the 8 and 7-year-old duo. Now, this is a ship that actually disgusted me back in the day when I first made this video, and even till today. Granted, the shipping of these two is not as prevalent as it used to be, but there used to be a ton of explicit artwork about these two, and people would even go as far as to change Skid's gender to make it fit their little story a bit better, because a lot of people don't like the idea that Skid and Pump are both boys and they're just best friends. And the irony there does not escape me. People are okay with shipping these two children as long as they're opposite genders, but once they find out that they're both boys, all of a sudden it's gross. Because of course it wasn't gross to be shipping an 8 and 7-year-old in the first place. This one is by far the worst ship on the list, and I'm happy that people have started to pull away from this one and realize how weird it is to ship very small children. But as always, there's going to be weirdos on the internet who are going to do what they want to do anyway, if for nothing else, just the shock value and the rage that they can farm from people. If you enjoyed this video, check out this video I did on the Pibby Corrupted tunes, or check out this video about Sonics.exe. Thanks for watching. This is Orsa Course. We'll see you tomorrow with another one. Peace, peace.